Autumn, perfect. So good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. Lots of familiar names on the list, and folks are still kind of coming in. So I'm glad you could make it. This is our first in a series of webinars rolling out the results of this work by Montgomery Associates, which is two pieces. Looking at groundwater sustainability plans in the region and summarizing those and providing some observations, and then also updating and extending the time series of the Butte Basin groundwater model. So today you're going to hear about the North Sacramento River Corridor results and the Inter-Basin Coordination and Joint GSP, which is Groundwater Sustainability Plan evaluation. So I'm Christina Buck, Assistant Director with Butte County, Department of Water and Resource Conservation, and Lisa Porta with Montgomery Associates will be giving the presentation today. So I'll just give a little bit of background first on what we're going to talk about today. So Lisa, yeah, perfect. So you're going to hear just a little background. Of course, the motivator here is the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and I'll tell you a little bit about the project, where it's come from. And then Lisa will cover the approach to this comparison and evaluation, and describe the results of the sustainable management criteria and some observations and recommendations. The full tech memo is now available. We posted it yesterday, so I don't expect that you've probably gotten into the weeds of it necessarily yet, but hopefully maybe you've taken a peek. We'll cover the highlights, and then it's available, and you can always reach out to me with follow-up questions and thoughts. So next slide, please. So we'll just launch right in. This is the Inter-Basin Coordination Analysis and Modeling Project. That's what we've called it. It's led by our department, Butte County, on behalf of the Vina Subbasin and the Wyandotte Creek Subbasin, who both received funding through the Department of Water Resources Sustainable Groundwater Management grant program. And so this is jointly funded by those two subbasins, and it's really a focus on the technical analysis, providing information on contents of the groundwater sustainability plans, and you'll kind of hear where that came from. But the idea is that this effort provides information that then can support conversations and coordination between GSAs in the North Sac Valley moving forward. And that coordination, really, the nature of that in terms of who and how and where and what is still to be determined. And there is facilitation support services. Tanya Carlone will begin to facilitate some meetings to pull together a work plan that will define some of those things. So today's talk is not about how that's going to happen. It's really just this technical content information that can help support those conversations that will occur in the near future, or begin to occur in the near future. So with that, a little more background just on why interbasin coordination, right? I think Sac Valley's recognized the importance of that, since Sigma came along in 2015, really. But interconnection between our subbasins means that we cannot work in isolation, right? We recognize that there is connection, and that water management decisions in one subbasin could affect or influence aquifer conditions in a neighboring subbasin. And so we need to be aware of what each other are doing. And Sigma, of course, is really founded on local control. And so that's important, that the authority and the decision-making occurs at the GSA level and within the subbasins. But we recognize really the value of having a shared understanding and establishing lines of communication across these subbasin boundaries is going to be important for achieving and maintaining sustainability in each one of our subbasins. So it's also really just an opportunity to learn from each other and collaborate when it makes sense, whether that's on projects, right? A lot of subbasins are pursuing recharge, are dealing with the same kind of challenges related to data sets and data gaps. And so, can we compare notes and share notes and learn from each other as we go along? The other piece of it, of course, is the Department of Water Resources is really the one that's required to review potential impacts on adjacent basins. And so as we all begin work on periodic evaluations of our plans, that's really kind of our self-assessment of evaluating how are we doing, what are conditions, do adjustments need to be made to the groundwater sustainability plans. There are some specific, these italicized bullets on the right are specific pieces out of DWR's guidelines for things that need to be addressed in the periodic evaluations. So I'm not going to read through all of them, but it does call out, describing relevant inter-basin coordination efforts and understanding and describing potential impacts from adjacent basins. And so really the hope is that this work and the tech memo can help each one of our kind of individual subbasins address some of these points as we move into periodic evaluation work. So, the goal is that this can also help support those efforts. So with that, that's kind of the background and motivation. Lisa's going to give you a little bit more background on what's been done previously. And it's my pleasure to turn it over to Lisa Porta with Montgomery Associates for the rest of the presentation. We will take questions at the end. So Lisa will go through her presentation. You'll be able to ask questions in the chat, so you can put those in at any time. Or at the end, you can raise your hand and we'll call on you and you can unmute and ask questions. So jot down your questions. We're going to get through the presentation first, and then we'll have time for questions and answers. All right. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you, Christina. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for joining us today and spending your lunch hour with us. Hopefully it'll be worthwhile. My name is Lisa Porta. I'm a principal water resource engineer with Montgomery Associates, and I've worked on SGMA planning and implementation 2015. And I've led with Christina this technical effort to review the information in the GSPs in the region. And it's been really interesting to see how this all is coming together in the Sacramento Valley. So let's dive right into the background on inter-basin coordination and how we did this evaluation. So first, a bit of background going back a bit in time. The SGMA mandated the creation of the Groundwater Sustainability Agencies. So in the Sacramento Valley, there have been 27 groundwater sustainability agencies formed across 11 subbasins, shown on this map here, and over 6 counties. So that required quite a bit of coordination and information sharing, because in the end, even though there's 27 GSAs, the GSAs coordinated to submit a single GSP, a single plan for each of the subbasins. So that was really a great effort. As you can see here, how the GSAs are set up. In Tama County, the blue basins here, they all share the same GSA, so coordination is obviously easier and facilitated by that effort. In the Colusa subbasin, for example, there's just 2 GSAs surrounding each of the counties. They have JPAs. In the eastern side, it's a little bit more fragmented. We have a patchwork of GSAs, mostly around the water districts, but they're also coordinated to do just 1 GSP per basin. And the GSPs were all submitted in 2022, except the US subbasins, they submitted a coordinated GSP in 2020, a little bit earlier. So now the entire valley has approved GSPs, and this is now, we're in the middle of implementation. And soon the periodic evaluations will be due to do a self-assessment, as Christina mentioned. So during this coordination and collaboration for the GSPs, there was an understanding that inter-basin coordination will be needed for future efforts as well. It's not something that just happens once for the GSP. So a framework report was developed under the facilitation of Tanya Carlone from CBI and Butte County leading that as well. And so this framework report, inter-basin coordination report, identified 5 key pillars for coordination during GSP implementation. And these are information sharing, joint analysis and evaluation of that information, coordination on mutually beneficial activities such as projects and management actions, things like that, filling data gaps, coordinated communication and outreach so that across the region there is a general understanding of the GSPs, and that everyone has a similar path forward or understanding of SGMA sustainability efforts. And then issue resolution process, hopefully it's just a placeholder, hopefully no conflicts occur, but that's there just in case. And so information sharing sort of already occurred quite a bit during that GSP development. So now we are in this phase of joint GSP analysis and evaluation, and that's what we'll be discussing today. Some coordinated communication outreach is already happening. As Christina mentioned, there's facilitation support services that are starting to be in place. And then today's webinar and a series of webinars is also part of this effort for communicated communicating to the public in an organized fashion on all these efforts. There's a website on the Butte County Water Resource Conservation website on Inter-Basin coordination where you can find more information on the efforts that were developed in 2020, 2022, and also the TMs that we're producing under this work will be posted there. So as a reminder, today's focus is on the Northern Sacramento River Corridor. This map here shows the subbasins that were outlined in this Inter-Basin Coordination Framework report for coordinating amongst each other. They were organized around two corridors, the Sacramento River Corridor and the Feather River Corridor. So in tan and brown is the Sacramento River Corridor and green is Feather River. The Feather River Corridor webinar will happen in a couple weeks, but today it's the Sacramento River Corridor. And the subbasins that we used for this analysis are Vina, Butte, Colusa, Corning, Los Molinos, and Red Bluff. So a bit more Sigma review and why this effort was important to dive a little bit deeper into some of the initial concepts that Christina brought forward. Sigma mandates use of local data to set policy to reach sustainability at the sub-basin level. So again, local control, sub-basin level efforts. So in general, this approach here has been followed by all the GSPs to set this policy, right? First, evaluate groundwater conditions with existing data. So also understanding what constitutes significant and unreasonable conditions in each of the subbasins. And then based on these two items, set policy thresholds to protect beneficial users of groundwater. And this then is supposed to help reach and maintain sustainable groundwater conditions over the long term. And so this happens by each subbasin. So if this all happens in isolation, subbasin by subbasin, you know, who knows how that affects a neighboring subbasin. So that is where that regulation from DWR comes in. Policies of one subbasin cannot prevent a neighboring subbasin from achieving sustainability. And why is that such a concern in this region? It's because the basins are all interconnected hydrologically. So this map shows contour maps or groundwater elevation contours. This is an example of fall 2023. Those are data provided by DWR. And as you can see, the water flows across the subbasins, across the region, you know, north to south, from the Sierra Nevada to the center. And so there's no significant flow barrier. Groundwater moves between subbasins, might be affected by pumping in neighboring subbasins. So in areas where you see these kind of bullseye dots, this is areas of pumping. And so as you can see, when you pump in one area, that might have a ripple effect in another subbasin in the same region. So the coordination between policies and water use therefore becomes important for each individual subbasin to be able to reach sustainability per their own goals. So how did we try to make sense of all this information and all the GSPs in the region? So here's a general approach. So we first looked at the GSPs to evaluate and compare key content. So we used the 2022 GSPs for Vina and Butte subbasins. The other subbasins in Sacramento River Corridor had to be revised. And so we looked at the latest approved GSPs, which were revised in 2024. We also looked at water year 2024 annual reports for the latest information. We obviously canvassed Sigma Data Viewer, the DWR information as needed, and also reached out directly to GSAs to make sure we have the latest and greatest information available to make sure we summarize everything. So this was helping to establish a common understanding of basin conditions at boundaries. Then looking at all that, putting it all together, we then looked at identifying if there's any significant differences or commonalities. Again, this is to look at potential issues of concern related to groundwater interaction at the boundaries. So really a focus is at the boundaries. And then reviewing the SMC is identifying significant differences, potential impacts that could lead to undesirable results between subbasins. I would like to stress, though, that we did not analyze SMC in a sense of critiquing or discussing SMC, how they were developed. That's up to DWR. That's not up to this technical effort. This technical effort was just to state or collate all the information as it was developed in the GSPs and just compare, just see what the commonalities and differences are, and not more than that. I must say we did also review the DWR recommendation letters, though, or the approval letters with the recommendations, so that we understood at the region what the recommendations from DWR were as well. And I will go into that in a few slides as well. So with all that background, hopefully that makes sense. This is now we're going to go into some of the key information, key results that we found. This slide reminds you a little bit of the acronyms of the Sigma acronym salad that we have. So when I mentioned SMC, it's a sustainable management criteria. SI is sustainability indicator. MT is a minimum threshold. UR, undesirable results. MO, measurable objective. And finally, IMs are the interim milestones established at 5-year intervals. So you will see some of these acronyms peppered in around the slides. So we will focus today on just looking at 3 sustainability criteria, and that's the groundwater levels, land subsidence, and water quality. Those were the 3 key ones that are prevalent, obviously, in the Sacramento Valley. We don't have seawater intrusion. An additional one that folks probably would ask questions about is interconnected surface water. That one is kind of its own category right now. There's guidance coming out from DWR later this year, next year. So we decided that that one we're not discussing in detail in this presentation, but it is in the tech memo. So you can still look at what we found in the technical memorandum for that. So overarching goals and how we did this, again, evaluating the GSPs to identify commonalities and differences across the elements. We did take a look at generally HCMs or hydrogeologic conceptual models to see if there was a general common understanding of the basin framework and groundwater conditions, and then focused a lot on the sustainable management criteria, the policy that was developed based on the technical information available to GSAs during GSP development. And so again, as Christina mentioned, this is supposed to be supporting GSAs for coordinating across subbasins, and also as they embark on GSP periodic evaluations that are due soon in January 2027. So this is just a brief review of what we found looking at the hydrogeologic understanding and in the GSPs. Generally, the Sacramento Valley basins share a good general understanding of the regional hydrogeology. Basins used similar references. A lot of times the 2014 reference from DWR was used for general geology information. In Sigma, for setting sustainable management criteria, there is a requirement to identify and define a principal aquifer. A principal aquifer is an aquifer that supports groundwater pumping and groundwater use in a basin. And as you can see, the subbasins have had similar, but also in some cases different approaches to that. We have 3 subbasins, Vina, Corning, and Colusa, that identified one principal aquifer. Butte, Los Molinos, and Red Bluff, 2 principal aquifers. This doesn't necessarily mean there's a problem or you know, a big issue here. This is just saying that in some basins they identified different layers in the aquifers in a way that they thought those 2 aquifers are split up hydrologically a little bit, hydrogeologically, and therefore they were able to set their thresholds separately for the 2 aquifers. However, it's not a major conflict. It's just something to be aware of, and maybe something to consider coordinating across subbasins. Also, it should be noted that there's more data and tools that are becoming available in the next year or so. GSA should coordinate with each other, but also with DWR. DWR is embarking on a big effort, the basin characterization. Especially, I think they're starting in the Sacramento Valley with some of this effort, incorporating additional information, really cutting edge information, AEM, the aerial electromagnetic, or the MRI of the aquifer. That will help a lot with potentially refining the understanding of these aquifers. And since that is a regional effort undertaken by DWR, that will be available to the GSAs in the next year or two whenever they're done with that. And so the good news is that that can be a source of common information as well. So let's go into more of the actual indicators. So we we looked at all of the representative monitoring networks that were submitted with the GSPs and just mapped them. So you will see a series of maps coming up here. Everything is mapped. That's a good way of visually to assess what is going on at the boundaries of these subbasins. So you see here the subbasins are clearly identified with the different colors. And then the dots are wells. The darker and thicker dots are deeper than 500 feet wells. The green ones are in the more 100 to 300 foot range, and then you see small yellow dots. Those are the very shallow, less than 100-foot wells. So those could be a combination of different types of wells. All this means here, these are the wells at which water levels get measured and at which minimum thresholds and all those sustainability criteria are established. So this is the network for policy setting. And so it is a interesting spread of density of well networks. In general, it's understood that the denser the network, the more pumping there is and the more wells that are available. It's notable, for example, in the Colusa Subbasin, there's a lot of rice fields and less surface water, more surface water use and less groundwater use. And so groundwater measurements are not as maybe prominent in these areas. But in these other areas, there's more ground level monitoring. So this is good awareness too. Different subbasins took different approaches in organizing the networks. And I know that there's already some conversations between subbasins to kind of maybe figure out how to level the field a bit. So now you will see that in the next few slides, we're splitting this network between the deeper wells, the 500-foot wells, and the less than 500-foot or the shallower wells. This is not meant to be splitting it into the principal aquifers. It's just for looking at the data better in a more cohesive way between the depths of the networks. So when we look at the minimum threshold, which is the threshold at which you don't want to fall below because it might create some local unreasonable conditions. The MTs and the different subbasins, they followed different approaches. And generally, the approaches followed were based on aquifer conditions, existing historical water levels. So all subbasins took a look at that. For example, what was the lowest level in the last big drought? Or maybe an average of all the drought water levels or things of that nature, or an average of the last 10 years. So historical water conditions and also most recent. The other item in common was that all subbasins, to a certain extent, used criteria to protect domestic wells. That was something that was especially prominent in the revised GSPs that were resubmitted. In Vina, for example, they used the management areas. There's 3 different management areas that have different networks and different approaches for minimum thresholds. And then in 2 subbasins, Corning and Colusa, they used an approach to having a focus and a non-focus area. Focus areas would be those that have maybe more pumping or lower water levels to focus on, and then non-focus is maybe the areas that have less issues. So that is generally just kind of an overview of the approach. And if we focus on the shallow wells, which is the majority of wells used for setting these minimum thresholds or all the policies in this region, we start seeing that these approaches actually result in some potentially major differences at boundaries. So the fact that approaches are different between subbasins is not necessarily an issue, but then you have to look at what do these approaches result in those values, in those threshold values. And so here I highlighted a couple that are pretty prominent. So at the boundaries of the Vina subbasin with, for example, the Corning subbasin here in red, you see that the Vina minimum threshold levels are more than 60 feet lower than the minimum thresholds in the Corning subbasin. So that is a big difference there. And then similarly at the Vina and Butte subbasin boundary, there's minimum threshold differences between 25 and again, almost 60 feet as well. So this is something to be aware of and maybe can spark some conversations between the GSAs and these subbasins. In addition, after the minimum thresholds, the MT exceedance frequency is used to quantify undesirable results. And so if you have a different network and then a different minimum threshold approach and values, and then that is used to create your undesirable results, which is um, the criteria that DWR is mostly looking at for identifying if there's problems in the basin, that creates varying policy outcomes, and it's compounding differences between the subbasins. So therefore, again, looking at how these policies are set and the results of it can be helpful. Moving on to interim milestones. So the reason we looked at that, so I'm skipping over measurable objectives, which is the goal um, for each well to reach a water level at, because there was actually no big issues. The measurable objectives were pretty similar within less than 10 feet differences between the subbasin boundaries. So we felt that was actually really good, and we didn't need to dwell into it. Um, we looked at 2027 interim milestones for a couple of reasons. One, when we initially started discussions with the GSAs in the region, they were keen on finding out about those similarities or differences, because 2027 is when the periodic evaluation is due, and that's the first milestone to look at, to see how water levels are doing in the region. So we took a look at that. We plotted the interim milestones similar to the minimum thresholds. And good news is, because in general, interim milestones follow a little bit more of the measurable objective goals and approaches, we don't see very deep differences. It's less than 10 feet for the most part. So these differences likely do not need attention, and those are goals. And so it's good that the region generally has a good goals for sustainability in the interim milestones and measurable objectives. Okay, moving on to subsidence. So this is the only slide on subsidence, so I'm going to spend a bit of time on it, and there's a lot of information here. So there's interesting. Subsidence is not an area of concern in most subbasins in the Sacramento Valley up north, and this is why maybe less effort was spent on those. But the one subbasin that has measurable subsidence that is starting to be a challenge to focus on is the Colusa subbasin. So they spent a lot more time in the revised GSP to refine how they approach the minimum threshold and desirable results and measurable objectives. Um, you have commonalities in Butte, Red Bluff, Los Molinos, and Corning. So the other four middle subbasins here all have the same minimum threshold. There was some coordination, I understand, going on during the revised GSPs. And so they have something very similar, although they have different measurable objectives. The Vina subbasin is the only one currently that is using groundwater levels as a proxy, which is allowed under DWR regulations. But they did not use a specific subsidence monitoring network at this time. So subbasins in a western area, especially Colusa, are a focus area to avoid subsidence, because we do see some lowering of groundwater levels and more pumping. And so DWR is taking a very strict and prescriptive approach to subsidence, especially because the San Joaquin Valley has such subsidence problems. And the BMP that I'm listing here just came out about 2 hours ago. So, the best management practice on subsidence, which I haven't had a chance to look at yet, but it's available now. So take a look. DWR is providing guidance to support refining subsidence information and setting your criteria and your policies for the periodic evaluation. So hot off the press. Water quality is the last indicator that we'll discuss today. So water quality is interesting. It's a little bit different. First, for setting your water quality criteria, you have to identify which constituent of concern are you going to follow, measure, track, and which one is of concern in your area. And so one item that's good is the entire region used salinity as its tracking constituent of concern for water quality sustainability indicator. So we agree on that. Salinity is a good indicator. Of course, this region is highly dependent on agriculture, and salinity is a challenge. Very saline water is not good for crops, and so that is one of the reasons salinity is so important to track in this area. Um, measured by different indicators. So salinity can come in different ways. You can measure it with specific conductance, electrical connectivity, which are very similar items. They're almost interchangeable in some cases. Total dissolved solids is a different way of measuring your salinity. And so the basins used slightly different ways, approaches to setting the sustainable management criteria. So, for example, all the Tama County subbasins used total dissolved solids (TDS), and they also used the same minimum threshold of 750 milligram per liter and same measurable objective of 500 milligram per liter. So that is all the same here. Colusa subbasin instead used electrical connectivity, which is measured different. It's not a concentration, it's a current, so microsiemens per centimeters. Butte and Vina Butte used also electrical connectivity, and Vina used specific conductance, but it's very similar. But you see the values are different. They use different thresholds, 1600 microsiemens per centimeters versus 900. And then the dots on the map show the water quality monitoring wells at which these thresholds are being measured against. And so slight differences, but really not a big concern. It probably does need a lot of attention from the region, but it's just something to be aware of how the different subbasins went about setting their the water quality indicators and thresholds. So I'm sure I went a little fast, but I'm gonna have plenty of time for questions. We're kind of now going into observations and recommendations. Christina, did you want to
Nope,
stop
you're
for a sec? No? Okay, we'll keep
you're
going.
good.
There's just a couple more slides. Okay, so this foundational information for GSP implementation is much more detailed in the tech memo. These were just some highlights, and also providing some highlights on big picture observations and recommendations we saw. So we're looking at our map again. So as mentioned before, Tama County subbasins have very similar methods and approaches to setting their SMC. So especially after GSP revisions, there's a lot of commonality. So that area is pretty well coordinated, obviously. Then the Butte and the Colusa subbasins have also some commonalities. For example, in setting the water quality SMC, they're the same. So they have coordinated a bit too in their GSPs. Corning and Colusa at the Stony Creek basin boundary. So they have this Stony Creek as a boundary. They're also coordinated. And one of their coordination, not, I don't want to say issues, but coordination focuses, I want to say, is the fact that there's subsidence over by Orland. So the subsidence could spread into the Corning subbasin. And so they're coordinating on that, and they ended up setting the same subsidence measurable objective, which is helpful because that means that they're on board on setting similar policy for that indicator. And then finally, in the Vina subbasin, Vina, we've seen there's quite a bit of differences in sustainable management criteria values and approaches throughout. So this is a good opportunity at this time for the subbasin to maybe look at what the neighbors are doing and coordinate and just do an additional assessment on that effort for the periodic evaluation development. So further, I also mentioned earlier that we take a look at the DWR approval letters and kind of took inventory of the different recommended corrective actions to be addressed. So recommended corrective actions mean that they're items that the GSAs should focus on for reviewing and developing during their periodic evaluations, which if these items are addressed, that will help make sure that you're still sustainable in your subbasins. So, and that the GSPs continue to be approved in the region. And so this is a laundry list. This is more for visual representation. All the subbasins had recommended corrective actions, up to 8, and there's subsections too. So Colusa, Red Bluff, Los Molinos, Corning, those are the revised GSPs. They still have a lot of corrective actions to look at for their periodic evaluation, and Vina and Butte have a few as well. So if we look at it, if we flip it and look at the main item in the recommended corrective actions, and then underneath see which basins have those, it's clear quickly that all 6 of the subbasins have the same recommended corrective actions or very similar. At least they have to address something around groundwater levels, land subsidence, and interconnected surface water, as well as water quality. The only one that doesn't have a recommended corrective action for water quality is Butte. But now you also see why it is so helpful to look at the similarities and differences and looking at the GSPs across subbasins, because now you can all coordinate on these items and ensuring that maybe we can look at how the different subbasins are going to address these actions, these recommended actions by DWR. And then a few basins had additional items to revise, maybe for the monitor networks, HCMs, and projects management actions. But this is really a chance with this awareness and this knowledge of this information that regional collaboration can really be helpful at this time. It's really good timing before embarking on periodic evaluation work. So finally, recommendations for further coordination. It's pretty much things that I've been mentioning all along, but it would be helpful to do another review of monitor networks along the shared subbasin boundaries to identify possible data gaps and also coordinate on filling data gaps. I know some of that coordination is already happening, but that's just something in general. Oops, sorry. And ensuring that monitoring at the basin boundaries is adequate. Now you've seen the similarities, differences. It's really important to monitor at the boundaries and not just in the basin center, so that you can identify if things change drastically and may affect a neighboring subbasin at your boundary. So increasing communication between GSAs with differences in SMC at boundaries is important. So the ones that we identified today, as well as reviewing the recommended corrective actions, RCAs, received on similar topics. And specifically here, I'm identifying what some of the main topics were. So Butte and Vina Subbasin will ask to evaluate groundwater level minimum thresholds and impacts on beneficial users, and also looking at the effects of the water level MTs on other indicators. So that is something that these two subbasins have in common and could work on potentially together. The Butte County subbasins need to review, all of three of them need to review their subsidence monitoring approach. So the BMP might be helpful there. And then obviously interconnected surface water characterization at SMC. That is one of the most challenging items, and DWR recognizes that as well. And so really strongly recommend a regional approach within the North Sacramento River Corridor, following the release of guidance from DWR, hopefully in late 2025, as it relates to the Sacramento River, because that the Sacramento River in this region, it creates a boundary. If we look back, as you can see, the Sacramento River is in the middle here, and it's a boundary between subbasins across the region. So having a similar approach on how to characterize depletion, potential depletion of the river, as well as management criteria is really important, so that there's not like a difference in between the east and the west bank of the river. So that's it. The last one is water quality. And we saw that water quality does not seem to be a big area of concern. However, just a reminder, there's other major programs in the Sacramento Valley that are also looking at water quality effects, especially from ag. And so there's Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program and CV salts that are looking at monitoring data collection and analysis of water quality in the region. So strongly recommend coordinating with these efforts so that the GSAs don't have to do it all on their own. So coordination between other efforts with SIGMA is also really helpful. So yeah, finally, this is just summarizing that there's a tech memo that has all this detail. It was shared with the GSAs, and we have received initial input from some of the GSAs to revise the memos. We have a parallel effort going on, as Christina mentioned, updating the basin model. And so we have 2 more webinars coming up to share results, similar results for the Feather River Corridor, and then also looking at using modeling for inter-basin boundary flows and water budgets. So with that, I'm gonna stop here and happy to take any questions. And I would also mention, if you have specific questions in your basin, please reach out to your GSA in your basin. The GSA managers have been apprised of this effort and have contributed so they will not be surprised if a comment comes in.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Lisa. Great kind of overview and walkthrough of the content. The link for the tech memo is in the chat, and the maps and figures that Lisa showed, most of them are in that tech memo, so you can pull that up. Just real quick again, if you want to ask a question on your Zoom menu, there's a React button that has this heart. You can click on that and it opens kind of another menu and gives you the option to raise your hand. So do that if you want to be unmuted and ask your question verbally, or you can put your question in the chat and we'll be checking that out. So we've got a good amount of time to answer and ask questions. If you have more of a comment than a question, please keep that to less than 2 minutes, and we'll just do our best to answer what we can. So looks like we have the first one. Hi, Deborah Lucero. Everybody used salinity for water quality. What other types of water quality measurements could be used? Yeah, Lisa, can you address that?
Yeah, so, and for example, in the Feather River Corridor, the other one that we'll address, we'll review at the next webinar, one of the subbasins used nitrate. So nitrate is also an indicator that some basins have used. But again, the Irrigated Lands Program and CV salts actually address nitrate and salinity in the region. So that's something that is being monitored. So coordinating with these will help also to keep track of other constituents of concern.
Yeah, great. Any other questions? I'll just add while I give you a minute. Again, just a reminder, I think we have an upcoming, I'll plug our upcoming webinar. So the next piece of this information for the Feather River Corridor will be presented by Lisa on August 7th. Same time, kind of 12 to 1 webinar, and that will focus on the subbasins along the Feather River Corridor. So Wyandotte Creek, Butte Subbasin, North Yuba, and the Sutter Subbasin. So similar content, just specific to those subbasins. The tech memo will be available soon as well, and we look forward to having you join us there also. We'll send out a registration email probably in the next couple of days for that webinar, so stay tuned.
So
All
I
right.
see question on subsidence, and so that's because of the data BMP that just came out. And I see Stephen is on the call. I'm not going to put him on the spot, but I did not have time to read it before this. Okay, but the question was, what is the difference between subsidence? Let's see,
Monitoring.
did it get deleted? Okay, maybe I can't read it right. Oh yeah,
Oh.
subsidence monitoring, Vina and Colusa. So this table gives you that information. So in Vina, they use ground levels as a proxy, so not a subsidence network. But I believe that is a recommended corrective action, so that might change during the periodic evaluation assessment. And then Colusa took a they used the INSAR data, the data that are provided by DWR, and then use that to assess on a regional and depth level how subsidence gets measured and tracked. So again, some differences, but that might change during periodic evaluations.
All right. And then Marty asks, under which of the 5 pillars does amendments to the GSP reside?
Let's see. Well, that's a good question. Where would that be? I mean,
I think it's more, maybe I can
yeah,
address
go ahead.
one.
Yeah.
I think in response to, so each of the subbasins has to do a periodic evaluation at least every 5 years. So as Lisa said, it's due in January of 2027. And when you evaluate what's, yourself through the guidelines of DWR, but also in light of the determination letter that the subbasin received and the recommended corrective actions within that letter, then there's a decision of whether you can address those things kind of within the periodic evaluation, or whether the GSP needs to be amended to address those corrective actions or any other changes that the GSA really feels is necessary. So it's not directly in this Inter-Basin coordination framework. These pillars are really to guide how the subbasins can coordinate and work together going forward. So that assessment of whether a GSP amendment would occur would happen by each individual GSA or subbasin. Anything to add, Lisa?
No, I think that's exactly right.
Okay, and then the next question was, what are the principal aquifers? Can you describe that a little bit?
Oh yeah, so and we mentioned that before, but a principal aquifer is an aquifer in which water is used. There's a beneficial use of groundwater, ag, domestic, municipal, and the reason in some areas there might be a separation between aquifers, or a layer of a confining layer, such as clay, that might prevent the water to flow from the top to the bottom aquifer. So they hydrogeologically act differently. There's different hydraulics, and so you would want to set your thresholds differently. But basically, it's just an aquifer in which there's use of water.
And that terminology is specific to, it came out of the
Stigma.
Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, right? That's kind of legislation terminology. Yeah. Okay, so Todd Turley asks, will the recorded presentations be available on GSA websites? And what about the actual slide decks? Yes, we will send out an email with a link to the recorded webinar presentation and the slide deck for folks that weren't able to attend, and then we'll post this on the project page as well. So yes, we definitely want to make this available for reference going forward, or for others that didn't make it today. And then Jim Graydon asks, this is a valuable effort to identify differences, gaps, and potential conflicts between basins. What process is in place or being developed to address and reconcile these differences between the subbasins? Yeah, that's an important one. And I mentioned toward the beginning that Butte Subbasin, on behalf of its neighbors in the region, has applied for and been awarded facilitation support services through DWR's program. And so Tanya Carlone, who supported Inter-Basin coordination during GSP development and continues to support the Butte Subbasin GSAs in coordinating amongst themselves, she will be providing the facilitation for that regional coordination. And so that she's just kind of getting up and started. But that's really what I've been talking about as a parallel effort. This project, grant-funded project, is creating the information that will help inform that second effort, which is really where the coordination will occur. So it hasn't been defined yet, but is coming soon in terms of who, what, how, these things can be reconciled that are pointed out in these documents.
Some other interesting questions I see.
Yeah.
So as you were talking, so I think this is a good one, Todd. Are you suggesting the MTs and MOs should be the same between boarding GSAs and subbasins? No, not necessarily, right? This is not exactly what we're trying to say, but we're trying to say this should be looked at, because it's just a matter of identifying if water levels were to decline, and this is potentially something you could do through modeling or through additional analysis. Is that going to pull water from another basin? Is it going to make another basin not be able to reach their sustainability to a minimum threshold? So even though they may not need to be completely the same because there's some hydrologic, differences, but when they're very different, it just begs the question: is there going to be an impact? Should we kind of look at it again and see what could happen? So that I'll leave it at that. It's more of a yeah. Additional work probably needs to be done to kind of figure this out at the subbasin level. But it's just good to it kind of raises a flag a bit.
And to really define, is it a problem or isn't it, and how to go from there.
Yeah.
We can't put a link to the presentation in the chat, but we will provide that in the near future. We'll post it right after this, probably this afternoon.
Yeah, and there was a question why Wyandotte Creek is not included. It is included in the next presentation. So Wyandotte Creek, because it is not adjacent to the Sacramento River Corridor, but it's adjacent to the Yuba River, the Feather River, that will be covered in the next webinar. So it was included in the analysis, just not within these subbasins.
And what does discrete management mean? And was that something that you said, or was it in the slides?
I'm not sure.
can clarify
I'm not
if
sure
you want to.
what that refers to. Maybe I said it, but I don't remember in what context.
Okay, so another question, is the surface water connection covered in the document? I can't remember what
Yes.
you said about that. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it
It's,
is.
yeah, for some reason the chat seems to be like jumping around for me and
Yeah,
okay.
I think it's because there's responses to previous chats, so it's difficult. Yeah.
Did we miss any? Autumn, did we miss any? Okay. Good questions.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any
Under
other?
Deborah Lucero's question, I had provided the link to the project page, and that way people will be able to access the video and the slide deck on that page after they're posted.
Great. That's where we'll put it. Yeah. So Jeff David says some subbasins in Sacramento Valley were approved after initial submission, while others, Colusa, Corning, Red Bluff, Antelope, etc., received incomplete determinations and had to go through a revision process. During this process, these subbasins made commitments to groundwater demand management and domestic well mitigation as management actions. So how should these differences and commitments to management actions be folded into these inter-basin coordination efforts?
Very good question. Thanks, Jeff. We actually included a section in the tech memo that does document the project's and management actions. And I guess I have a couple minutes. I will talk a bit about this because it is interesting, especially in the Sacramento River Corridor. Just didn't know if we would have enough time in this presentation, but we looked at specifically, I know you mentioned demand management here, Jeff, but we also looked at projects such as recharge projects, and if different subbasins are using terminology like using the same, surface water or flows from Sac River. So just a recognition that also at the project level there could be potential conflicts and using the same water, or having it try to account for a similar water source. So that's something that we included roughly, briefly. It's again for awareness in the TM. And then we did mention these management actions that you said, Jeff, and they're in there. Again, it's part of awareness and providing that information to everyone. So we try to, it sounds like from the questions that I see here that we provided the information that people are interested in the tech memos. So if there's further questions, reach out on this information.
Great. Okay, so Emily McCabe has a question that's not, it's a little bit outside of what you looked at for the tech memo, but I'll ask it just in case you know. Can you explain why the Cal EnviroScreen 4.0 for parts of Chico has score of groundwater threats 93? And what does that mean? Are you familiar with that?
No, I'm not actually.
Scoring? Okay. Kristen Cooper asks, I am not sure that the current documentation showing how minimum thresholds and measurable objectives will avoid significant and unreasonable undesirable results. For example, chronic lowering of groundwater land subsidence, degraded water quality. Can you speak to this?
So that is where GSAs need to do a little bit more work on their own. We did not go all the way to trying to understand, okay, the different MTs, are they going to affect undesirable results in each other's basins? That's quite a bit additional kind of policy determination to be done. We documented some of the undesirable result approaches, but that would be the kind of the next step to see, are these differences in minimum thresholds potentially causing undesirable results across subbasins? So I don't really have a full answer. It's more of a start. This information is sort of helping with the base information you need to get to that answer.
And a follow-up to that, it seems there is limited coverage in the monitoring network for key parameters like levels, quality, subsidence, interconnected surface water. How will this be addressed? So
yeah, and that's something that's in the RCAs. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that's beyond the scope of this effort. DWR has provided their reviews when they approve GSPs. They also provide recommendations and their thoughts behind if the basin will likely reach sustainability. So each GSA or each subbasin needs to look at their recommended corrective actions and identify if the monitor network needs to be revised. But we were just mentioning generally, it's good to kind of figure out, do we have enough coverage and monitoring at at the boundaries if we want to coordinate amongst GSAs and have a better understanding of effects at the boundaries. So that's a little bit beyond the scope. That's different from DWR. DWR is looking at the basin in itself right now, but in the next phase, they're going to start looking more at inter-basin coordination with the periodic evaluation, right? That's the next phase of their reviews.
All right, Richard Harriman asks, since subsidence can be irreversible, as in the San Joaquin Valley, why is this measurement not subject to more rigorous analysis and expedited review? I mean, I think that's
yeah. I mean,
by DWR.
yeah, exactly. I mean, here we just, as I said, we just documenting what the GSAs did. So the GSAs may need to do some more analysis because they received recommended actions from DWR. So that is definitely something probably that's going to happen. But this was not part of the scope of this effort here to do additional analysis on each subbasin's, policy setting. That's DWR's role.
Yeah, great. Okay. Marty Dunlap asked, how does the Department of Water and Resource Conservation, that's our department in Butte County, plan to use this information? And I would say, as I mentioned, I think the slide that Lisa showed that really had the lineup of shared recommended corrective actions. As each of these subbasins, and Butte County works in 3 of them, as each of these subbasins, work on their periodic evaluations and work to address these recommended corrective actions, I think this information just provides another piece of the puzzle of things that should be considered as the subbasins address these corrective actions. So that's really how I see it and how we see it being used going forward, kind of just reminding us as subbasins to not only do the good work within our subbasin, but also kind of lift our head up and look around periodically and talk to our neighbors as we're each individually kind of addressing and thinking about changes that may be made to the GSPs. So that kind of gets to the next Kristen Cooper's question too, related to, I believe, Vina received feedback for insufficient characterization of interconnected surface water and groundwater dependent ecosystems and the need for improved monitoring protection measures. Will this be addressed in the future? So what I just said really addresses that. It is through that periodic evaluation that the GSAs will do through that process is where you're going to see how those issues are getting addressed through plan, either amendments or through the periodic evaluation process.
Yeah, and Vina was not the only one getting that interconnected surface water action. All of the basins have that. And I think all the basins in the state.
Yeah. Great. All right, we have just a couple minutes left. I don't think anyone has raised their hand, right? Yeah. Great questions, good discussion. All right, we've got one more. Salinity has not been much of an issue in our region. Yeah, thankfully. And why does it seem to have a heightened review in this analysis?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Salinity is not a big issue in Sac Valley, but that's what the GSAs decided to use. It's an easy indicator. It's easy to measure. It's pretty cost effective, and it's a good indicator for water quality in general. So it's just that's to be consistent and compliant with SGMA. You have to do some water quality monitoring to identify if there's any potential issues in groundwater quality. And so salinity was used as a good indicator for that. So I guess it's not, we didn't want to necessarily make it a big deal here. It's more that is what the GSAs did in order to be compliant with SGMA, and therefore we just highlighted it here. And maybe I should mention that, yeah, it is not a big issue.
Okay, Deborah Lucero asks, as a follow-up to Marty's question, would it be better to use a nitrate measurement here?
Well, that's up to the GSAs, right? So if that they want to decide to use nitrate, they can. But again, there's other programs, irrigated lands program, et cetera, that are using nitrate as well. So GSA, Sigma, GSAs are they can coordinate on these other programs as well. And so that's just part of the GSA's decisions on how to manage, monitor and manage their groundwater conditions.
Quick follow-up, has DWR provided guidance on water quality?
No official guidance from DWR, but there's been guidance from other sources. There's a little bit of guidance in the BMP on SMC that's draft. I believe they're going to finalize it eventually. But I think the best way to see if water quality was addressed correctly or not is to look at the letters from DWR. And so, yeah, there are some, as you can see here, there are some recommended corrective actions. Butte didn't, but the other 5 subbasins did. And so that is your go-to right now to see, do we need to do anything different for water quality? In some instances, it's more related to the network itself. Maybe there's not enough points of measurements or things like that. But
Yeah, great. All right. Well, that gets us to 1 o'clock, so we're gonna wrap it up there. Thank you again for joining us today. We will send out and post the webinar, and I hope you can join us if you're interested in the Feather River Corridor on August 7th at 12 o'clock. So look for that email with registration for that as well. So take
see
care
you
all.
then.
Thanks a lot. Thank you,
Thank
Lisa.
you.
We appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.